This episode is in partnership with Authority Magazine. Authority Magazine, a Medium publication, is devoted to sharing in depth and interesting interviews featuring people who are authorities in business, pop culture, wellness, social impact, and tech.
Today, we're going to be talking about Kung Fu fighting.
Well, everybody was Kung Fu fighting, and it's a bit of a cult classic kind of song, but today's guest is a little different.
He is Steve Jones, joining us from London, England, where he uses martial arts to help people navigate a demanding and stressful world. Steve, welcome to Believe in People.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
Steve, can you share a little bit about your very diverse background and how you became a martial artist and health and wellness consultant? And clearly, I just want to mention too, you specialize in the management of, and this is kind of cool, adrenaline-based emotions such as fear, anxiety, stress, and anger for high-achieving professionals. Can you share a little bit about your background?
Yeah, it's quite a story.
I know.
I moved around a lot when I was a child. My father was a fairly eminent cardiorespirologist. So I was born in Germany, moved to England, lived in San Francisco, moved back to England. Then we emigrated to Canada when I was 8 in 1968. And my father ran the cardiorespirology unit at MAC. And then we lived by the golf course. Then we moved up to Ancaster. And so it was quite a formative time, really, because I saw different cultures and experienced different kind of sets of beliefs. So I never quite fit in anywhere. I always sort of questioned everything because things didn't quite click. In Canada, I fell in love with ice hockey almost the moment I arrived, and that was my passion. So that was my community. But when I first came to Canada, I was introduced to violence within 2 days of arriving because of the way that I spoke, of course, with an accent. And then through my fairly extensive experience of ice hockey, violence became also sort of a language, at that time between me and my compatriots. When I was 18, my father did a sabbatical at Merton College in Oxford, and I went back with him, and I started to study there and in classical guitar and music, which became my overriding passion. And I've always been lucky in my life to find exceptional teachers, and I came under the influence of some young, they were good 15 years older than I was, ex-students of Oxford, chemistry students, who were very much into music and were working as professional players, but had a very broad outlook on life. So they introduced me to all kinds of things that at that time completely blew my mind, because I was pretty much Canadian and had that sort of sport winner sort of psychology. But it never sat particularly well with me. There was always something that didn't kind of click. So my mind was really opened to so many things. I read a lot of philosophy. I grew up in a completely non-religious background. In fact, very anti-religion of any kind. But I started to get into Chinese philosophy and reading Carl Jung and Abraham Maslow and people like that. And I attended a summer school for music, which was run by these said people, and they were very forward thinking. So on the summer school, we had Alexander Technique teachers, aromatherapists, massagists, NLP programmers, and we had a Tai Chi teacher because they had brought him on to to free up the body. The classical guitar is a rather strange position when you're playing it because you have one leg raised. And they had brought this chap on to help with posture so that your hands could become free because you had a central core that was quite strong. And I was on that right away. And from there, that began my martial arts path. And I studied for Tai Chi for 5 years, which was very interesting, with an exceptional teacher. But then I found it wasn't really providing me with what I needed. It started out, and yes, it really got me in touch with the things that are we take for granted, but are really, really important in martial arts, like where your actual physical center of gravity is. Correct breathing and how breathing can be harmonized with movement. So I began my long study of Qigong exercises, which have become a lifelong practice for me. And just the action of moving into the body and the inner world beginning to relate to the outer world. So it's a moving meditation done at a fairly slow speed. So your internal world needs to be very active in order to move at a slow speed. It's not like what you would think. It's, like you go slow and it's all sort of lazy. Actually, you have to learn how to move slowly and be very active inwardly and be in contact with multiple things like your center and your breathing, certain distances as you extend the hands out. So it was a great study for that, and I carried it with me. Then I looked for more violent or more kind of traditional martial arts to experience them. I studied the Japanese martial art of Aikido with an exceptional teacher. And so it went on like this for, I don't know, about 7 years, studying and reading. And then I met a man who was an exceptional martial artist and fighter, and he taught me about the reality of conflict. So the fight-flight response, the emotions that you have when you go into conflict. He was a bit rough. He was a street fighter, and he had a tremendous amount of real firsthand knowledge. And that ended my life. Up to this time, I'd been living in Oxford, and it ended my life in Oxford. And I had to, because he was based in London. So I came down to London and lived in a camper van outside his gym for 3 years. And just absorbed everything that I could from him. And then in 1992, he was killed in a motorcycle accident.
Wow. Is that Derek Jones, Steve?
That's Derek Jones. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. He was a Welshman, but had a tremendous innate sense of body mechanics. And because he had put himself under the direct pressure of conflict, actual physical conflict, he through first principles had really come to understand the effects of the fight-flight response. And that really is central to what I do.
Why don't you explain that to us? When you talk about, well, you said something earlier that piqued my interest when you said the language of violence.
Yes.
But I'm just, what is the language of violence? Is there something deeper going on there that I don't grasp?
Well, yes. Well, I don't know. I'm not sure what you grasp and you don't, but yes. And it's basically the language of stimulus and response, which is deeply inherent in all of us. It's how we operate. Something happens and then we react to it. The fight-flight response is the most intense stimulus and response that you can have. So
is that either fight or run away? Is that basically it?
Well, yes, it is. It's basically our emotional reactions to things are quite binary. The expression for laughter is the same as crying type of thing. And so when we receive a shock, we tend to go into a polarized state. Well, one is to fight back. That leads to escalation. So somebody calls you a name and you get angry with it, you're going to escalate. Or you capitulate. So somebody threatens you and you then begin to show the signs of a capitulation, fidgeting, looking away, moving away, trembling in the voice, those kind of things. So, when we talk about people, we have to really, I think, over the years, I've come to the definite understanding that we are three-brained beings, that we have three brains. One issuing from the brain stem, which is all of our autonomic motor functions, things that we don't have to think about. And also higher movement is brought into that area via the cerebellum, which is a small part of the brain, which separate, that hangs off the brain stem. So that's sometimes called the lizard brain. You may have heard that term. The second brain is called the mammalian brain, and that's the limbic system. That is the midbrain. It's quite a complex thing, but it's in the middle of the brain. And that is where all of our sense perceptions are rooted into. And then it acts like a router, and it's things that need, emotional reaction or attraction. So, for instance, food, we smell food and, oh, yes, we're attracted to it, or it's not good food and, oh, we go away from it. So it's quite binary. But that is where the fight-flight response is initiated from the amygdala, which is part of this rather complex system. So when we receive an impression, it's rooted into that. Now, if it's an impression that we've had previous impressions of, like somebody threatening us, then the memory in the amygdala, the area of the limbic system, transfers short-term memory into long-term memory. The understanding being that if you have something that happens to you and it's dangerous, you want it as a long-term memory.
Right. Fear of dogs or something like that.
Exactly. So if you were bitten by a dog when you were young, that impression now is going to have more power over you. And if you had an abusive parent, or you were teased mercilessly at school for something, all of these things begin to build up in us, and they start to crystallize into things that become quite permanent in a way, unless we start to work on them. And that's kind of where my work really begins with people. So just to finish, the limbic system, and then the third brain is the cerebrum, which is the last part of the brain that's made, and that's where all of our executive functions begin to issue from. So, our judgments about people, language, what we, ideas that we have about ourselves, et cetera, et cetera. So there's three brains that fundamentally operate in us. And if we're talking about working with anxiety or fears, anything like that, we have to take that anatomy into consideration.
Huh. And Steve, I don't know if you coined this, but no, or I have heard this, but it sounds counterintuitive to say that martial arts helps people navigate a demanding and stressful world. Like, how would you interpret that?
Well, an actual physical conflict is really quite unusual for people in the Western world, unless you play ice hockey in Canada, of course. But conflict is with us all the time, and suffering, things that upset us, and we really have a very bad attitude towards suffering. Our life is not supposed to be perfect and run perfect from start to finish. Yet we're kind of sold that idea. So conflict within us, the fight-flight response goes off in the same way and this is extremely important, from a real stimulus or an imaginary one.
Right.
So when you imagine something happening to you in your mind, then the reactions, there's about 72 different reactions that go on in the body. This release of adrenaline and then cortisol, massive blood migration around the body. And these things are what we generally call fear. The feelings of fear, butterflies in the stomach. And you're getting butterflies in the stomach because the blood is being pulled out of the intestine and pushed into the legs. So the point is, as we said, physical violence is the most intense when your life is threatened, or when the welfare of somebody you love, who you were with, is threatened. The fight-flight response goes off immediately, full bore. And it's to be able to stand in front of that and channel that type of energy takes practice and experience.
When you're talking about channeling that kind of energy, though, channeling it in what direction, I guess, is that part of the counseling that you're doing?
Absolutely.
Because you have to, well, when you talk about Tai Chi earlier, for example, you are learning where the center, and there is so much talk about the breathing, finding the actual natural center of your body and everything, but that has a tremendous sort of calming effect when that starts to take place within your soul, even not even within your body. And is that somehow what you're teaching these people to do when they are faced with a situation? Because it doesn't have to be physical violence. It could be the threat of losing your job. It could
Absolutely.
be the threat of losing your house or something.
Yeah. Yeah. Just an argument with somebody or anything you imagine. The fight,
So
flight.
what do you show them? What do you tell them to do when they're in that situation?
Well, if we think about it as stimulus and response, so that if I imagine something, that's a stimulus, or if it's in real life, it's a stimulus, goes into the limbic system. The limbic system then decides that it's a threat, or it measures, as we said, if you've been bitten by a dog, then it's going to have more power, but it measures it. And then a corresponding reaction goes off. So, if you think about losing your house, then you're going to start to get nervous. You're going to start to get anxious. So this tremendous energy, because you don't want to get rid of the fight-flight response, right? It's a seriously useful thing, but you need to learn how to channel it. And that channeling begins, first of all, by just training yourself to be in front of it, to sense it, to become present. Now, that can't just be in your mind. You have to really enter the physical. The first action is a physical sensation of your body, right? Because when we get shocked, everything goes upwards and tenses in one degree or another, depending on the shock. And so the action of returning physically into the body is really the first action that has to happen. With that movement of relaxation or slightly dropping down, if you're standing, you change your blood supply, because the fight-flight response has a massive effect on blood supply, the rush of blood to the head, that sort of thing. So if you relax the body and have practiced that and drop in, the blood supply starts to move downwards. And if you're standing and you slightly bend your legs, just ever so slightly, the leg muscles turn on, which then creates a very strong pull of blood downwards. So if you're in front of it, and then you come to this point of sensation, so that now that reaction, the energy from the reaction, is not just going where it wants to go, which is up and, oh my God, fight or flight. It's actually being spread over the whole body. Because when you make a neural connection from your mind to your feet, that takes energy, and you only have a finite amount of energy in the body. If you start trying to stop the fight-flight response with an idea, or trying to, have an emotional sort of think about, a sunset, it has nowhere near the power that is necessary to affect this response.
Hey, Steve, you said
Hmm.
we have a finite amount of energy in our body. What happens when that's drained?
When it's drained,
Yeah, when you've tapped out.
you will reach a catastrophic failure.
And what does that look like and feel like?
Depression, mental illness. A lot of people use self-medication.
I was just going to say, do you turn to other things in order to sort of try to artificially boost yourself up, like drinking or
Yes.
something like
Yes.
that?
Well, drinking brings a certain sensation into your body. It brings a relaxation. That's why people like it to release tension. Unfortunately, with all drugs, it's a law of diminishing returns, in that you have to have more of the drug to get that same kind of feel. And so it's what I do is really using practices that have been used in meditation, in martial arts, mainly from the Chinese background, because men have known this. And when I say men, of course, I mean human. I'm referring generically, not to non-men. Generally, thank you. That's the word I want. These practices have been left over thousands of years to do with meditation, to do with movement, and have come to us through various means, oral traditions and written down. But unless you take them and breathe life into them, they won't have any power. So you have to work with these. You physically have to work with these things. So after, for instance, becoming connected to the body, that naturally leads you into the breathing. And if you have practiced correct breathing and, Qigong exercises, that type of thing, that literally strengthen the breath, the muscles of breathing, they open up the sinus cavities and the pathways of breathing. They allow your chest to expand easily. Then your breath cycle suddenly becomes much stronger. Now, the limbic system, the mammalian system, is very, very related to the olfactory nerves in the nose. So the breathing in, it's the closest sense to the limbic system. So that when you affect your breath, well, there's two things really that should be said. One is that the breath stimulates the limbic system to reharmonize itself. Just so breathing there is one of the ways. And another way you can work with it is facial expressions. Because your face is very related to your emotional part of your brain, because this area of the face is all to do with expression.
I'd like to ask you, we're talking so much about what happens if you're in that sort of situation, okay? If you're in a situation where you're confronted with either stress or perhaps a bully or perhaps someone who's physically threatening you. Can I ask you a question from the other side? Because you're telling us how to protect ourselves from this. What's going on in the mind of the other person who is threatening you or is threatening you with violence? Is there any, you've told us so much about the makeup of us who are on the receiving end of this. What's driving it in the other person? Or is anything driving it? Is it an animal thing?
Well, that is a complex answer. I can give you a few examples. A mugger, it's professional. They want to scare you. They want to shock you so that you freeze, and they can easily take what you have, and they can't remember you. So that's a professional motivation. Alcohol is involved with 90% of all street attacks, I would say, certainly in London. So when people drink alcohol, it anesthetizes the front part of their brain, which is the part that sort of that inhibits our behavior. And so we start interpreting things in a different way. So if somebody looks at us askance, or I mean, I was a bouncer for many years in nightclubs in London, so I became extremely cultured in the expressions of alcohol, cocaine, ecstasy, all of those things, and they all change. But cocaine is another one that makes people feel instantaneously more powerful. And so it's dangerous for in bars, because guys suddenly who wouldn't say boo to a girl now suddenly blather in the most inappropriate ways. So my job was to remove them from the situation.
Wow.
That's one thing. Another example would be people harboring jealousies towards you. This happens a lot with school children. Well, not school children, but youths at school. They take a disliking. They maybe think you're come from a richer background, or maybe you stole their girlfriend or something.
Or you come from Canada with a funny accent, or vice versa.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Sorry, Amy, you were going to say.
No, not at all. And Steve, so what, now I appreciate the fact that this is a journey for you, and you've studied many different philosophies. Right now I'm into Stoicism. So, I mean, I don't know how you feel about that. I know breakfast with Seneca. And so I'm interested with your journey as far as was there a moment that something triggered, maybe it was Derek Jones, that inspired you the most? And then the transformation for you, was there a certain time in your life that you just sort of clicked and it's like, okay, I have a different perspective of my being?
Well, I think
I know there's a few things there.
Well, generally, as human beings, we are self-evolving. We have a call to evolve ourselves, and we either heed that call or we don't. And if you feed that kind of call, which you do by practicing things, art, reading, then there are moments when things suddenly cohere in us and our understanding goes on to another level. And then we continue on. And so there are moments, and there have been moments for me when, people sometimes call it an aha moment,
Yeah.
And an aha moment really is a moment of understanding, and it integrates. It's a movement of integration within us. The three fundamental energies of the body, the mind, and the emotions suddenly come together, and it always simplifies things. So these disparate things that we've been looking at and wondering about, all of a sudden, boom, they come together. So it goes on. Now, if we in martial practice the action of bringing these three energies together, which is fundamentally what you have to have to deal with conflict. You have to be able to bring three energies together. So we talked about the physical energy by sensation, the emotional energy comes through breath, and the mental energy comes through this activity, lowering the activity in the mind of the internal conversation and the internal picturings, because that's the place that, unfortunately, but it is the way it is, we live most of our life in this imagining and having these conversations with ourselves. So really, behind everything, the work of a human being is to try and bring these three fundamental energies into relation. And martial arts is, for me, is a very powerful way, but so too is music.
Right.
I mean, immersing yourself in nature also can do that, or involving with art. So, but just to finish your very interesting question, I've come to sense that is the work that lies behind all others, and that it's an ongoing. We are given a certain amount of time on this planet, And the evolution of our consciousness, or you could call it our attention, to widen and strengthen our attention, is the fundamental work that lies behind everything.
Amy's going to ask you the last question that we ask every week, but I just want to ask one short one, and that is that in today's world, what you're talking about is patience, thought, looking inward, being reflective, all of these sorts of things. But in today's world, people seem to think we don't have time to do any of those things. We've got to rush to get on the tube. We've got to win the video game. We've got to be scrolling on our phones to see who we're not supposed to like today, these kinds of things. And then we have to take all kinds of prescription drugs in order to go to sleep at night or to avoid having a breakdown during the day. What you're saying to me almost sounds as if we have to go back to some sort of state that we're losing because of our own progress.
Yes, in a way, the tempo of life, particularly since the advent of the smartphone, but really since the Industrial Revolution and machines, has increased the outer tempo. However, it comes back, for me, it comes back to stimulus and response. What, as martial arts, we're called back to is really to become present to yourself in any situation. So, and not necessarily to change it. The idea that you can change something is just an idea. With experience, one sees that you can't change anything without real work, without really spending time on doing it. So we're trying to develop an attention that looks both outwards and inwards simultaneously. So those are the two worlds. Without a quality of attention, then the outer world just makes your inner world react. And so haste is a really good one, right? Or when you can't find your wallet and all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, where's my wallet? And the internal world goes. So we want to develop an attention that can become a third force between those two worlds and balance them. And it's an attention that can sense the outside world and in the inner world, my reaction, and observe. So any situation that you're in, be it violent or playing a video game, you can always become present to it. And it's at action. So for instance, here we're talking. We could at the same time sense our feet touching the ground. So right there, you've become rooted into the present moment. We could sense where the hands are. We could sense the postures, and nothing has to change. But now my attention is on my inner world, and I'm getting impressions of myself reacting in some way, but it doesn't matter, because if you stay in front of that and suffer yourself reacting, something begins to change gradually. But you have to go through the battle again and again. Just doesn't happen. Part of us wants to go, okay, I've got the secret now. That's it. I'm done. Right. And it doesn't work that way. You see something about yourself and one thinks one's free from it, but one's not. One has to live that reaction, whatever it is, again and again. But if you are present to it, then something will gradually decrystallize.
I have a feeling, Steve, that you face that story all the time, that, okay, I'm done. I can feel that would happen. I also, I ask the last question, I want to let the viewers and audience know that you wrote a book called The Intelligent Warrior. So I want people to, pick that up. That's available everywhere. I think it's still available everywhere.
Yeah, you'd be hard pressed now to find it in a bookshop, but it is, the best way is, it's published by HarperCollins. So you can go to their website, or it's on Amazon. And it's only about £3 now, so it's a steal.
Well, everyone buy that book. Absolutely.
And it's got some video links in it. And I'm also right in the process of launching an app, which will be an app that can accompany people,
very good. Is it BMS? What is it? Steve?
BMS martial art. Yeah. It's not
Yeah,
available
Steve's-
on the App Store yet because it's still in development, but you can look at it via a company called Passion.io. So BMS-Passion.io, and you can see it there and sign up for it. And there's all kinds of good stuff on it. And I'm developing it now with some of my students, and but it's probably next month or it'll be on the App Store.
Very
So,
exciting. Oh, I'm thrilled to hear that. Well, I want to ask you, Steve, at the end of our podcast, Kevin and I asked the question to all our guests, and you have had a very interesting background because not only are you working through the creative music, the creative of martial arts, but also helping with anger, and you've seen another side. You were a what's it called? Bouncer. And so I want to ask you, why do you believe in people?
Well, first of all, we'd have to define what a person is, when we say people, because the quick answer to that, I believe in people because we need each other, and we're all made on the same laws, and within each person there is the data present in them for evolution, for the elaboration in oneself of awareness, of love, of hope, and every human being has that. But we live in a rather strange world where those impulses and that data is covered up with all of the crazy things that go on and the things that we get sold as lifestyles and the rest of it. So that side of people I don't really believe in. But underneath it all, I believe that everyone has that element of a sacred force within them. And I believe that fully because I've tasted it in many different situations. And that's what I choose to see in people when they come. And we all need each other because that's the only way we will survive as a species. I believe so. That's kind of what I believe.
Thanks,
why
Steve.
I believe in people.
Thanks for spending a half an hour with us. I am actually breathing much more calmly now than I did at the beginning of this conversation. So
I know you could
Excellent.
really hang with Steve all the time. Don't you feel like sort of this calming, sort of,
exactly.
chill, sort of.
Unless of course we piss him off, but we're not going to do that.
Well,
one little finger.
Yeah. Well, the work goes on, we're all in this movement of self-evolution trying, it's a great thing that you're doing with this podcast, talking to people and getting the communication of, different views on how to evolve and become more harmonized, really. So well done.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks,
Thank you
man.
so much. Really appreciate it.
All right.
Well, Kev, one thing that it struck me with what Steve said was even in a conversation like this, we can still internally sort of stay connected with our body by just noticing where our feet are, our breath is, and our being. And I found really interesting because it's that hard and that simple at the same time.
Well, it's and the effect of the external world, the effect the external world has on you on the inside is actually can be very dramatic, which is something I don't think a lot of us, including myself, don't really understand. That if you actually do kind of step back from it for a second and internalize things, you're not going to have maybe a panic attack, or you're not going to make a rash decision. You're not going to send that email to the entire staff of your company telling them that they're all assholes or whatever, because you found that sort of center of gravity within yourself. And anyway, if you're on a mission to find your own center of gravity, well then, join up and subscribe to this podcast, because we're going to talk to somebody next week who's going to help you find a different center of gravity that's just as important. Thank you very much for spending your time with us here on Believe in People.
Thanks, everyone.